Hi, we're 37G, and this is our Atheism podcast, episode 2. I'm William Garrison, and this is Michael Aune, my cohort. We're here today to talk some more about religion, or
the ways we wish that our lives didn't have to deal with religion quite as much.
Yeah,
because we're going to talk about some feistiness as the newly converted here, or at least newly discovered atheist. Yeah, Billy's had more than a few tangles with various people on the interwebs, with the twits, and the Reddit memes, and I don't know.
Yeah, Twitter. I've been on the internet quite a long time, and Twitter's a great outlet for those kinds of conversations, just because there's so many people on the service. It's so easy to search and find people talking about a certain topic. Reddit.
And it only takes 140 characters to piss someone off.
Absolutely.
Baiting is a lot easier when you can just send it out to the world.
The main topics that, or one topic that I know we've discussed recently, have been some of the lawsuits that the Freedom from Religion Foundation has filed recently in some other states. I think it was Texas, for example, that they were trying to outlaw the public prayer that happens before certain football games, and this is high school games. This isn't at the collegiate or National Football League level. But basically, if people are uncomfortable during this public prayer, especially because those cater towards Christianity as kind of a main religion, not only do I feel that it shouldn't be broadcast over the stadium during this school function, which might add a government school function. But that's what the Freedom from Religion Foundation found, and why the lawsuit came up in the first place. The conversation started, because I've actually had a couple of these, started because people, when they get pissed off about this whole topic, they're like, oh, atheists are trying to invade my religion again. It's mainly me coming in and trying to clarify a couple of things. And that's mainly that anyone that isn't a Christian during these sort of situations is uncomfortable, and there's really no reason that they should be, given that this is a school function. This isn't a private Christian school, and we're not saying that you can't pray, during these functions. Most of the schools have moments of silence still that. Like, it's specifically to pray, just without using that verbology, and they don't specifically say, now we're going to read a passage from Timothy 2:12.
Just real quick, what's verbology?
I made up a word.
Verbiage.
Verbiage. Yeah.
Okay. I want to know more. Verbology.
It's like herbology, just with you grow and cultivate verbs.
You know where they didn't have prayer in school? Hogwarts.
Hogwarts, yeah.
I want to point that out.
And it was a pretty awesome school, we'd like to add.
If I could have enrolled, but I did not meet the minimum requirements for magicalness, so I was disallowed.
So these are some of the conversations, and like many things, politics and religion, not everyone has the same opinion, but...
Wait, people disagree in politics and religion?
Crap.
Newsflash, internet.
One of the reasons we do this podcast, and one of the reasons we want to spread this message, is just because we feel like the discussion itself is powerful. We feel that people, especially if you're interested in the discussion, shouldn't shy away from it. You should at least have the information handy. You should know all sides of it, and that's why I engage in some of these interactions like Twitter. So.
Well, I take it that you believe that there is a truth to be reached, and that the idea is that unless you are willing to engage in the discussion and present a strong argument for or against, and to counter arguments and hear out people of differing opinions, then how are we ever going to reach the truth of things if we aren't willing to actually meet somewhere and have a discourse about what things are really like out in the world, what is true, what is not. And particularly when it comes to religion, given that it intersects with politics, intersects with strong social interactions in the private sphere, those are serious questions that need to be answered, or at least discussed, because if we cannot come to at least an understanding about where people are coming from, what they're claiming, what the consequences of those claims are, how can you ever hope to have a functioning society, and one that actually does protect the very beliefs of the people you might disagree with? Because if you're not willing to have an intercourse with people, then at the end of the day, you have to assume, which usually is going to lead to bad assumptions, which is going to yield negative results. It's going to yield clashes between people. So although I might not agree with you, if I at least understand where you're coming from, I can understand your concerns, and you can understand mine as someone who doesn't share some very core beliefs, we can at least hope to move forward with an understanding that leads to a functioning society. So it's impactful, I think, at every level. I mean, between personal relationships between friends, all the way up to the federal level of government. What are we going to allow with the recent flaps between? Are we going to allow birth control to be divvied out or to be mandated to be divvied out by religious institutions that employ public sector employees or private sector employees?
Yeah.
A Catholic funded hospital that has non-Catholic employees under Obamacare, or the Affordable Care Act, I guess we could call it as well, if you want to go by its actual name. Is that going to be something that we can come to an agreement based on the theological justifications for opposition by Catholic leaders, but also the needs of the public sector and people who don't share those same values, but who might work for such an institution? So it's an important give and take that I think you have to engage in. So I think you're absolutely right to point out that it's very important that we engage in these debates.
Yeah, and tying into the earlier conversation about prayer during football games, at no point do the atheists or non-Christians that may have spoken to the Freedom from Religion Foundation about these issues, at no point are we saying we don't agree that in your home, in your churches, by yourself, in a group, should you not pray? It's just basically I shouldn't be forced in an uncomfortable situation where I either pray or just am sitting here surrounded by people that are praying. It's not like they give Muslims a time to pray, publicly during a football game.
Just wait until the first time they do.
I mean, this would be a completely different conversation. But, I think what some people lose sight of is the fact that we're a nation of diversity. We've got so many different types of people, different belief systems, different colors, races, ethnicities, that we can't lose sight of that sort of tolerance. I don't know if it's the right word I'm looking for, but we basically have to live in the same sphere, the same ecosphere, and we have to understand each other. And that's why these conversations are important, because we can't just assume everyone's a Christian. We actually have to have conversations. You shouldn't just assume that your friends believe what you believe, that they aren't aligned politically as what as you are. If they're truly your friend, then you should find out who they really are, what they really think. I think it's important. Not everyone wants to know everything about their friends, but I know Michael and I, as well as some of our other friends like Steven, do.
I know entirely too much about Billy.
Throwing that out there.
It's fine. So what are these debates that you've had as far as, what are you encountering on a consistent basis? What are the fundamental issues that people are clashing with you when you're throwing yourself out there or you're commenting on a topic? What are the things that are really setting off key debates right now? Is it generic claims? Is it specific topics that you're discussing? Is it...
It usually starts at a specific topic, but it generally gravitates towards an overarching theme, like you and I talked a little bit before the show. Burden of proof, for example. It's a common debate point, at least among the atheist versus theist debates. If you search YouTube for, Christopher Hitchens, any of his amazing debates, Sam Harris, Richard Dawkins, there are probably 10 different topics that they generally cover with the theists that they're debating between. But one of those is the burden of proof, which essentially is the argument that many theists that I've had discussions with on Twitter are like, how can you say my religion's wrong? How do you have the right to say that what I believe is wrong? And the argument I have is like, first of all, there's free speech. I can say whatever I want. It's a protected right that I have.
And he uses it.
You don't have to agree with me. You can call me an asshole. You can, I can have no friends because of what I say. If I said something crazy like pedophiles are cool people, I don't believe that. But if I said that, Obviously, I wouldn't have very many friends because people would disagree with me, but that's part of free speech. What I'm getting at is the burden of proof is, at least as I see it, is on the person that makes an extraordinary claim. If I say that Obama is a Muslim, that's a pretty, he's the leader of our country. He says he's a Christian. I kind of have to have proof to back up saying that he's a Muslim. And if I don't have that proof, then I'm kind of looked at as a kook, as a hack, as someone that's just hating Obama and is lashing out. Well, it's kind of a similar position I am if I say, that Zeus is real, that he has several, underling gods that control lightning and.
No, Zeus controls the lightning. Ares with war and Athena with knowledge.
I was thinking of the water, not Leviathan.
Poseidon is the father and the ruler of the seas. Yes.
If I made that claim that he exists and he controls everything, and then I would potentially need some evidence in order for at least people to believe me. Otherwise, they would just shrug what I'm saying off as, oh, he's just being silly or.
Well, no, I think that touches an interesting point because I think the general response from another religious faction is, no, it's not. The burden of proof is on you again, in that instance, to prove why it's Zeus and the pantheon of Greek gods and not God, Jesus and the Holy Spirit, or, Allah and Muhammad and his prophet. I mean, there's an interesting disconnect. If you're on the offensive, the burden of proof seems to be generally claimed to be on you. Oh, well, no. What? You're coming at me with this belief in Zeus and this pantheon of gods. Why is it the case that that's true, but not just Jesus and God?
Yeah, and I think I was mainly positing the difference between, like in the case of these Twitter interactions I've had, it's the difference between saying, I don't believe there are any gods because there's no evidence, versus them saying, well, there has to be Jesus and God. Have you read the Bible?
Oh, yeah, but that's what I mean is I think it's just interesting that they're totally willing to shift that burden of proof when they're the ones saying, whoa, wait a minute, I don't like that.
Yeah.
But I think there absolutely is something to be said for the fact that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. I mean, brighter men than I have certainly brought that up before. And I think Hitchens' kind of corollary to that, which is, that which is positive without proof can be dismissed as baseless. I mean, you simply do not have to respond to a claim, which is simply put out there in the world with no supporting evidence. And I think that is something that is lost on many people. If I claim that I have $1 million in my pocket right now, chances are you'd go, prove it. And if I simply stalled...
If I had blind faith that you had $1 million in your pocket, then that's fine. That's my problem. But the chances are you probably don't have $1 million in your pocket.
But it also seems for a claim that extraordinary that you are taking the risk in believing it, not that I am taking the risk in saying, I don't think that's true. And I think that's what's lost on a lot of people is the fact that you are positing a whole lot of positive statements, things that are affirming the way things are, that are affirming that these things exist, they have certain characteristics and certain traits. I'm simply saying that the evidence is not there to support even the basic assumption, just that there is a deity, blank statement, deity, not Judeo-Christian God with all of the attendant theological assumptions and historical, attachments to the history of the Jews, the development of Christianity, none of that. Just the base statement of there is a God and he is involved in the world. That's a huge statement. That says a lot about the nature of reality. And I think I have every right to go, what is your evidence for this? And so it's, I think, disingenuous to act somehow shocked, because in any other situation, in a non-religious context, if I was to say something with that sort of potential impact, you'd absolutely be coming at me going, wait a minute, what's your evidence for this? What is your reasoning behind thinking this? And it's not that there can't be arguments for God. There are some.
Yeah, we'll touch on those.
That at least get off the ground, although I don't think they go far. But again, the idea is that you can't just put this out there and act like it's suddenly a self-evident truth. That's absolutely not the case.
Well, and to side note on that real quick, it's also important to note that popularity of an idea doesn't necessarily mean that it's true.
Truth is not democratic.
Yeah, truth is not democratic. It's a majority of the world, especially here in America, are Christians, whether they be Catholics, Mormons, Protestants, whatever. But that doesn't give it more weight or more bearing in the realm of truth if you compare to, Islam or Hindu or any of the other major ideals. They're vastly different religions, but popularity doesn't have any bearing on whether or not it's true. And that's one of the other topics that sort of stems from Twitter. They like to throw out the numbers, whether the amount of atheists in the U.S. is 10% or less. That has no bearing on whether or not atheism is the right stance or whether or not it's true. It's a number that's growing, first of all. We know that. In some countries, in some European countries, it's much larger than it is here. We hope to grow those numbers even further once people realize that questioning your religion isn't impossible, and it's kind of liberating.
It's a discussion that should be had in an interesting way. The idea of questioning faith by many, I think, intellectual theists has been a strong talking point. And I think what we want to accomplish, we hope to accomplish, is to be part of the debate that says if you're really going to engage in the public sector as a religious person, you have to be willing to confront your own beliefs and the potential soundness of those beliefs and the validity of the arguments you're throwing out there, because you know what? There's a lot that rides on this. Your actions have a ripple effect just like everyone else's. And I have to combat the leanings of religious people all the time. I'm fairly socially liberal in my beliefs. And so given that there's a large conservative base, for instance, that means that those people whose beliefs are largely, at least religiously inspired, conflict with me and the beliefs that I feel should be the ones that are dominant. So not to take this into the political realm directly, but the fact is these are important discussions that have to be had.
Yeah.
And they can't be dismissed outright based on disagreement over a basic premise. So we have to at least acknowledge that for things like burden of proof over fundamental concepts, there has to be a discussion about what's reasonable, what's allowed, what's going to be permissible in these debates going back and forth on both sides. But to be fair, as the person who's simply, in a sense, putting the negative out there, that there simply is no evidence for God, it's on you at that point to provide the evidence. You need to convince me at that point, because I'm saying that it's just simply, it's lacking. That's not a positive statement. I'm not saying that there is something. I'm saying that there is not something, which would be the opposite, and thus requires a whole lot less proof in many, many respects.
Absolutely. Usually how these interactions, at least on Twitter, stemmed is they try to cite specific examples of allegedly that the world is perfect and how it had to have had some intelligent designer, and how intricate systems like DNA and the human internal system, all of our organs and how all of those things function, how could they possibly have been a product of chaos or random events? Diving into sort of the factual theory of evolution, it's actually not a set of random events. Evolution in itself is...
Evolution is not random. That is the key distinction. The evolutionary mechanisms are very well determined. It's the idea that the happenstances that cause this particular organism, perhaps, to survive is random. Oh, you got hit by a meteor. Congratulations, you were the unlucky one in a trillion.
Or the cousin species of older ancestors of the Homo sapiens that disappeared completely, that we did not evolve from, just because the Homo sapien ancestors at the time were more evolved. They had better ability to use tools. They may be outnumbered. There are... The evolutionary system throughout history has shown itself to work itself out. And
well, I mean, imagine you get two groups of people who randomly, one goes into Northern Europe and one goes into Southern Europe at the start of the Ice Age. Chances are the people who then had to survive the Ice Age in Northern Europe did not do so well. It's completely random which group went where.
Yeah.
Literally neuron fired, random happenstance, and this leader said we're going north and this one said we're going south. But the fact is, the principles of evolution were quite strict, which said the group that is better suited to their environment to survive is more likely to, and thus more likely to propagate their genes into the genetic pool, and their ancestors will be the ones that continue onwards. The mechanism is very easily defined and laid out, but the things that might play into that mechanism, that feed that mechanism, are random, yes. But that is not to say that the mechanism itself is random. That is a huge mistake that is thrown out there all the time, which tries to undermine it by somehow positing that random chance destroys the idea of evolution. But that is a topic for a completely different podcast, because that could fill more than a few books.
Yeah, we're defining random,
but it just brings us back around to the fact that things, particularly burden of proof, is something that is very important to lay out, because it's a fundamental concept about the discussion itself, and it does not matter about the content.
Yeah.
This is important to establish so that the discussion can happen, period. And I think that's what's important to really try and get people to focus on, is the fact that, again, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And the idea that there's an all-powerful being, at least one, who is responsible for the creation of all known reality, is an extraordinary claim. And so I say, show me the proof. And I think that's what I've not been shown, and that's why I'm where I'm at philosophically. I suppose this brings us back to our beginning point. You know, that's my take on the entire debate that we've just had about why burden of proof is important, and kind of the assumptions that need to be weeded out by those who would posit some things that I think are more than a little bit ridiculous.
All right, well, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.
Yep.
I'm thinking.
And he's done. No.
Again, this is easy to cut. So.
No, I know. It's the weird thing about this.
Yeah.
I could serenade the mic, and no one will hear this.